If you study the Second World War long enough, you eventually realize something uncomfortable. Survival during that conflict often had very little to do with heroism and everything to do with ruthless efficiency. Armies, resistance fighters and civilians trapped behind lines adopted methods so extreme that once peace returned, governments quietly erased them from manuals, outlawed their use, or buried them in classified reports. Not because they didn't work, but because they worked too well, crossing ethical and legal lines that post-war societies no longer wanted to acknowledge. Today, we're going to examine 5 of those survival techniques, not as shock entertainment, but as historical realities. These were measures taken by people who had no safety net, no rescue coming, and no margin for error. Understanding them gives us a clearer picture of what total war actually demands, and why modern conventions exist at all. What makes this topic important for serious historians and survivalists is that these techniques reveal how humans adapt under absolute pressure. They also force us to confront the difference between survival and morality. None of this is comfortable, and that's exactly why it matters. Let's get into it. This first method shows how starvation forced people to weaponize biology itself. During prolonged sieges and partisan warfare, particularly in Eastern Europe and parts of occupied Asia, soldiers and civilians alike resorted to consuming substances deliberately contaminated with parasites or bacteria to manipulate their bodies. This wasn't accidental food poisoning, it was intentional. Some resistance groups discovered that ingesting certain pathogens could, induce symptoms severe enough to convince occupying forces that a person was unfit for labor, interrogation, or transport. After the war, this practice was banned and honestly heavily discouraged because it violated emerging medical ethics and posed uncontrollable public health risks. From a practical standpoint, the lesson here is, grim but instructive. These people understood how occupying systems categorized human value and exploited that knowledge. In a modern survival context, the takeaway isn't imitation, but understanding how systems assess risk and utility. Survival often comes from knowing how you're being evaluated and, altering that perception to buy time or escape attention. This next survival trick explains why certain interrogation methods disappeared from official doctrine. Many World War II resistance networks trained members to deliberately inflict controlled, non-lethal injuries on themselves before capture. Dislocated fingers, crushed toes, or severe burns were sometimes self-administered to create injuries that would justify medical treatment delays or hospital transfers. Hospitals, even under occupation, were, chaotic and understaffed, which actually made escape far more likely than from a prison cell or interrogation room. After the war, post-war military law banned this practice because, it blurred the line between medical necessity and deception, and also because it encouraged permanent injury. Historically, it really demonstrates how survival planning included not just escape routes, but contingency plans for capture. Applied knowledge here means understanding that survival planning isn't only about avoiding danger, but about managing those worst-case scenarios. Modern survivalists can, translate this into less extreme preparation, such as planning medical diversions, redundancy in identity, or, legal strategies that slow hostile processes without physical harm. This third tactic reveals how civilians, quite ingeniously, turned infrastructure into a weapon. In occupied cities, some communities, believe it or not, deliberately sabotaged their own water and sanitation systems in subtle ways that caused disease outbreaks just severe enough to make areas strategically undesirable. The goal, really, was not mass death, but rather making neighborhoods just too costly to occupy or garrison. Troops rotated out, patrols thinned, and, control weakened. After the war, international law, classified this as a form of biological warfare, even when it was done defensively. From a historical survival perspective, this really shows how control of infrastructure equals control of movement. These civilians understood that armies rely on logistics and sanitation far more than just firepower. In practical modern terms, this translates into understanding how water power and waste systems shape security. A prepper studying this should focus on protecting and decentralizing their own infrastructure, rather than sabotaging others, learning how quickly society destabilizes when basic systems fail. This fourth survival method exposes why certain camouflage techniques were outlawed. Some World War II units, especially in irregular warfare, used human remains, animal carcasses, or battlefield debris to conceal themselves in ways that violated later laws of war. Fighters hid among the dead to ambush patrols or avoid detection for days at a time. It was effective because it exploited a universal human instinct to avoid corpses. After the war, this practice was banned as a war crime due to its psychological impact and desecration of the dead. Historically, it underscores how survival often depended on exploiting predictable human behavior rather than superior weapons. Applied safely today, the lesson is about understanding observation patterns. People avoid certain sights, sounds, and areas instinctively. Effective concealment in survival situations still relies on behavioral psychology, not gimmicks or gear. This final trick shows, why psychological survival tactics became regulated. Some resistance groups actually spread deliberately false atrocity rumours, exaggerated supernatural fears, or even staged fake executions to manipulate occupying forces into withdrawing from areas without a fight. Post-war conventions restricted these practices because of their, indiscriminate psychological harm. For historians, this really highlights how survival can hinge on narrative control. And for modern survivalists, the ethical application lies in information discipline. These 5 survival tricks weren't banned because they failed. They were banned because they reveal just how fragile our moral frameworks become under extreme pressure. Studying them isn't about glorifying brutality. It's about understanding the true cost of survival in total war. And, why post-war societies worked so hard to draw new lines. If this kind of deep, uncomfortable history is what you come here for, make sure you're subscribed to The Prepper Historian. Share this with someone who studies war beyond the surface level. These stories, well, they deserve to be remembered, not sanitized.